and welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be doing my March reading wrap-up. In the month of March, I read a total of 8 books. 3 of them illustrated mythology, basically. 1 of them non-fiction. And it's 4, actually it's technically 7, but you'll see what I mean. And 4 of them fiction. 2 or 4 novel length, and 2 novella length. I will be starting with the illustrated books of mythology, essentially. Indeed, I was gifted, I can't remember when, but I was gifted 3 illustrated books about mythology. These are books aimed at children, or I mean younger readers, but I'm a mythology nerd and I like pretty illustrations, so that's that. So we have Greek myths and Egyptian myths, both of them by Menzies and illustrated by Katie Ponder. And the third one is Norse myths, written by one Matt Ralphs, but also illustrated by Katie Ponder, so there you have it. I rated all of them with an 8.5 out of 10. They would make great gifts for children or, you know, younger readers, budding mythology enthusiasts, or mythology nerds outright, because you get an overview of the myths themselves, so the mythological stories, but you also get, you know, bits about the cultures of these stories, so the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, and the ancient Norse. Though bit of criticism with the book about Norse myths specifically, the author limited the identifier Norse to the Vikings, whereas as far as I know, it's not, I mean, it wasn't just the Vikings. Norse covers several different culturally, linguistically related peoples. There are also parallels with the Germanic tribes and their mythology, so that's a bit of inaccuracy I could have done without, and I think children should do without. Now, because these books are aimed at younger readers, sometimes I had to laugh because, let's say some myths were sanitized. And I mean, I know the originals as an adult, and well, yeah, some stories have adult content to them, and this was clearly removed in these books. But that's alright, because, you know, they're meant for younger readers. You also have plates dedicated to deities specifically, so you have chapters that group certain stories by theme. So in the book about Greek myths, you have myths about the creation of the world, so the cosmogony. Then you have myths about heroes, slaying monsters, etc., etc. And then you have pages dedicated to gods and goddesses. The book about Egyptian myths specifically featured stories I'd literally never encountered anywhere else before. Genuine myths or legends involving mortals and not just the main gods of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. So that was really neat. I actually learned something new, legitimately. And if you want an idea of the art style, well, this is basically it. And so this is what I meant about pages being dedicated to deities specifically. And okay, to be honest, I think these are kind of my favorites. Now, moving on to the one book of nonfiction I started and completed in March. It was The Witch, written by Professor Ronald Hutton. This is a thorough overview of the phenomenon of the witch in, well, Western culture, yes, but also in the wider world. So his intent with this book is to trace the origins of the various elements that went into creating the archetype of the satanic witch that was going around during the witch trials of the early modern period. First, he takes a look at the phenomenon of witchcraft or the witch in cultures around the world. Now, also keep in mind that in this book, and it's a conscious choice, he does address this in his introduction, the witch is specifically defined as a malevolent, malintentioned practitioner of magic. What some people, and what I would call a good witch or a white witch, he refers to as service magicians, which have existed in, well, most cultures throughout history as well. And he draws a kind of synthesis that presents the necessary conditions for cultures, ethnic groups to really start freaking out about witches and to start persecuting them. Then he moves on to a focus on European culture, but also cultures from around the Middle East in the past up to the time time of the actual witch trials in Europe. So he takes a look at ancient Egyptian culture, ancient Mesopotamian cultures, so Sumer and Babylon, then ancient Greece, ancient Rome. A point of criticism here, the way he wrote about the ancient pagan cultures of Europe and the Near East, it made it sound as if the Gauls had never been a thing. The Germanic peoples are mentioned for like 2 seconds, but nothing about Slavic peoples to the east. And I mean the Gauls especially, so the Celts of mainland Europe, there were people there that weren't Romans, so what about them? I know there's very little written record for Slavic peoples. I mean, there's none, I guess, for like ancient pagan Slavic peoples, the Gauls, the Celts, etc. So that would translate to a dearth of actual data and evidence, but then he should have acknowledged that, in my opinion. That's my point of criticism. It's fine that he couldn't really dig into that body of data because it doesn't really exist, but then it should have been acknowledged because it just sounded a bit weird to me. And then it moves into the medieval times and then the early modern period in continental Europe, looking at what happened in Italy, in France, Germany, etc. And then the third part is about looking at the phenomenon of the satanic witch, specifically in the British Isles. And I mean, he is British, so he does have additional expertise about this. A reminder that Ronald Hutton has written several books about pagan religions, the Druids in ancient Britain, and then neo-paganism as well. It's basically his topic. It's a thorough overview, though this is a historical overview. He analyzes the phenomenon from a strictly historical perspective as a historian. There is no attempt at a broader sociological analysis or an analysis of gender dynamics within this phenomenon. He does allude to it here and there, so don't expect that if you want to pick this book up. This is really more about history, but at times I felt like the analysis suffered from this. I've come to realize that I wish these kinds of subject would be tackled by teams of writers, not just a sociologist, a historian, a philosopher. And I mentioned a philosopher because I'm currently reading Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici and I'm not loving it. So yeah, a team of writers and experts tackling the topic from different angles, complementary angles and viewpoints to really give a full picture of the thing they're tackling. I want that. So collaborative nonfiction writing, can we make this more of a thing? Please and thank you. Still, this is very interesting. Like, I'm very happy I read this, though it was a bit tough going at times because the writing is quite dry. There's a lot of references to this author or historian in 1979 had this theory, and these other historians debunked that theory. So there's a lot of writing about the discipline of history itself and the discipline of researching the witch trials and the archetype of the satanic witch specifically, etc., etc. And at times I was less engaged by that. So do keep that in mind. Like I said, this is for nerds. It's a good thing, mind you, but this is really for nerds. And even, you know, for this nerd, this couldn't be more than a 7 out of 10 for me because I just wanted more analysis, more linking up of elements and like seeing patterns into things. Blame my autistic brain, I guess, make of that way. But still, if you're a nerd about witchcraft and stuff, yes. Moving on to the fiction now, and starting with the shorter fiction. First, I read What Moves the Dead, written by T. Kingfisher. It is my first ever publication by T. Kingfisher. This is The Fall of the House of Usher, written by Edgar Allan Poe, retelling, and I enjoyed it. It was a solid, respectable, creepy 7 out of 10. The story centers on a female main character, but this female main character is modeled off of, I think, the Sworn Virgins of Albania, which is considered a third gender, kind of. So there's a thing with that, and this person is friends with, are they called? Well, yes, they must have been called the Ushers in the story, and this person has been called by her friends because the woman of the family is not doing well at all, and there's some creepiness to do with mushrooms. Yeah. I love me some fungal shenanigans. So that was neat. There was a little reference to the mycological expertise of Beatrix Potter. That was a nice little wink there. It was short and to the point, but very effective. There was a bit of humor and playfulness as well. I really enjoyed T. Kingfisher's style. I would definitely be open to reading something else by her. And yeah, it was a good time, and it was a good retelling. There was just this perfect acknowledgement of the source material at the very end of the story as well, and I was like, That was well done. I mean, it couldn't be more than a 7 out of 10 for me because not much in terms of world building or theming, but that's fine. I had a good time with it, and yes, I would definitely recommend it as a literary retelling, and if you're in the mood for creepy fungal shenanigans. The other novella I read in March was Spear, written by Nicola Griffith. Now, I had read something else by Nicola Griffith in the past. In fact, I reviewed it for this channel. I read her Ammonite back in 2020, maybe? Which was science fiction featuring a single-sex society on an alien planet. You can check out my review if you feel so inclined. And so here, Spear is a retelling, again, this time a proper mythological retelling of the Percival motif, or the Percival character and storyline within the broader Arthurian mythos. Now, I've had not so good experiences with mythological retellings, let's be honest, but this one was actually enjoyable and worthwhile. It was also a very respectable 7 out of 10, only a 7 out of 10 because I didn't see much in terms of theming, really, or broader point, I guess. But I enjoyed the prose. I enjoyed the character work. I really enjoyed the main character of Spear. It's a gender-bent retelling of the Percival motif within the Arthurian mythos. So Percival here is basically female, is what I mean. And here, thankfully, there was historical accuracy in the setting, in the language that was used, the naming of things. So it is set in early medieval Wales, and so there are Welsh names, and there are some references to Celtic mythology as well. I think the ending wasn't the strongest it could have been, but conversely, so I said there was gender bending of the main character, and there's also lesbian representation that felt very seamlessly woven into the story in a way that also made sense for the broader historical context setting. So if you're also specifically in the mood for gay representation in a historically accurate mythological retelling, then you should definitely consider picking up Spear by Nicola Griffith. Then on to the novel-length fiction I read last month. First, I will mention Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Brontë. This is my first reread of Jane Eyre. I first read it 10 plus years ago, and I wanted to reread this one because it is a novel that I considered an all-time journal fiction favorite back in 2021, and also because I had stated in my Atypical and Autistic Coded Characters video that I thought a case could be made for Jane being read as autistic based on stuff I'd seen on the wider web, and I wanted to feel more confident about that statement. And you know what? I really enjoyed this reread. This time around, I rated Jane Eyre with a 7.5 out of 10. I enjoyed the theming, I enjoyed the character work, the prose, the love story. In fact, I really vibe with the love story this time around, but that was a bit sad for me as well. Anyway, and I related to Jane Eyre, and yes, I think you can read her as autistic coded, but I also did a full-length book review for this one, so if you want more detailed thoughts about it, I invite you to check it out. And would I recommend this one? Yes, if you're in the mood for a solid classic of English literature. And as you can see, I also have the Penguin English Library edition, and it's pretty. Finally, and this actually took up most of the month of March, I read the Gormenghast trilogy written by Mervyn Peake. Now, I thought of this as one book because I literally have a physical copy of the trilogy. It's an omnibus, but technically it's a trilogy, so that's why I technically read 4 novel-length books. The only reason I had heard of the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake a few years ago. Then my literature-minded ex talked about this with me because this is something he had read and which he had really, really enjoyed. Did he strongly recommend it to me specifically? Kind of. Not quite as directly as he recommended some other things, but in any case I decided, you know what, I'm going to read this, especially since a friend of mine is also a big fan of this one, and so she was very excited at the idea of me finally reading this trilogy. I guess it is considered a classic of speculative literature, kind of. Mervyn Peake was a contemporary of J.R.R. Tolkien, but less widely read. But yeah, I guess it is considered a more niche, obscure, fancy classic, maybe. And I was like, you know what, alright, I'm gonna read it. And it is not quite fancy as I initially thought. That's why I called it speculative literature. It's not entirely magical realism either. I think you could consider this surrealist literature. It does also have a good dollop of absurdism in it, in the sense of like what actually happens in the story. I don't think it's absurdist literature theming wise, at least referring to what I learned about absurdism in literature in secondary school, so again, you make of that what you will. So Gormenghast is the name of this big-ass, sprawling, ruinous castle in an imaginary country, I guess. It's never given a name. There's definitely proof that this story is supposed to take place in our world, but there's no geographical reference given at all. There are a lot of rituals that are carried out in this castle. Ridiculous rituals that have been handed down for centuries. No one really knows what the fuck they're supposed to do anymore, but you must follow them. There's a dude in charge of this with a shit ton of books of lore that he has to follow to the letter and make sure that everyone does these goofy as fuck rituals. And then it's centered on the characters that live in this castle. This castle is ruled by an earl, and so you have the earl, his wife, and his two kids, his daughter, and then finally, that's the beginning of the story really, a male heir is born to him, and then there's some few characters around that. There's a doctor, there's a personal servant, there are the sisters of the earl's wife, and then there's this conniving upstart that is trying to wind his way to the top of the social hierarchy, bit of a sociopath, and these characters are all a bit odd. I'm not sure all of them really work as realistic human beings, but it does make for an entertaining story at times. But I must stress this though, there isn't much plot at all. To me, Gormenghast is all about tone and atmosphere and the characters that just kind of bop along through the story and what happens to them and what they think. I mean, there is a bit of plot, but it is a very slow story, very bloody slow. There's a lot of descriptions and these little tangents about this character no one cares about. I mean, this quaternary character that's doing this thing, these little slice of life moments that you don't really care about, but it kind of just fits into the broader tapestry. This is also, as a result of Trilogy, that for me does suffer a bit from a style over substance problem. It does have a very rich prose, and so rich at times that I felt a kind of linguistic queasiness. I don't want to sell this short either. At times the prose is very beautiful. It does paint a very vivid and quite haunting at times picture of this castle and its denizens. I thought this was just 900 pages, but it's printed in very small font, so I ended up dual reading on my Kindle, and on my Kindle this is almost 1400 pages long. A 1400 pages long trilogy with that kind of writing, I neared reading burnout going through this. In fact, by the time I got to Titus Alone, book 3 in the trilogy, I switched to audiobook because I was just not connecting to the text anymore. And there's an issue with book 3 I also have to mention. Book 3 is a bit of a mess. It just goes through new characters and situations. It's a bit all over the place. It doesn't really amount to a coherent, broader narrative, and the very final conclusion of the overarching story felt a bit off to me. I was like, what? But I learned that Mr. Peake, sadly, when he was writing book 3, he was slowly succumbing to a neurodegenerative illness, so that might explain this just radical shifting of gears and then the muddled nature of the story in book 3. Funnily enough though, I also noticed this. There are some sexual moments and sexual allusions and mentions of cocks and stuff that just kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, what is happening right now? So this is not Tolkien, folks. I say this because, like I said earlier, Mervyn Peake is a contemporary of J.R.R. Tolkien, and as such I believe that works are often compared in contrast to one another. But now I understand the actual contrast. Like, this is not remotely similar to the Legendarium. And theming-wise, I didn't get much out of this. World-building-wise either. I mean, you have this big freaking castle, but like I said, it's more about the setting itself and the atmosphere that goes with said setting. It's also the most totally strange story I've ever read. Like, it's really hard to place in any kind of category and say what it is exactly. trilogy. I'm just still kind of confused about it overall, I suppose. I did enjoy some of the characters, not gonna lie. I did care about a few of them. After a while, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of rooting for you. Also, Lady Gertrude is based as fuck. Changed my mind. Woman just doesn't care. She's antisocial, loves her white cats and her birds. Lots of birds. Magpies especially, and I was like, respect, bitch! I enjoyed this more than not overall, but it's not a new favorite. If I were to consider the third book as a proper third book in a trilogy, this would only have amounted to a 6 out of 10 for me, but because of that external context, which I do think matters in this case, I'm not really counting it. So for me, this is a 7 out of 10. I do think the story could be considered concluded by the end of book 2, called Gormenghast, because there is a main narrative arc that is concluded in book 2, so you could stop there, in my opinion. I think it'd be better to stop there, but I mean, ultimately that's your decision. Would I recommend it? Maybe. It's quite a commitment, literature-wise, I suppose. If you like vibes in literature, yes. If you like, you know, ornate prose, yes. Don't expect much plot, don't expect, I mean, I didn't get much theming, so I would say don't expect much theming, but ultimately that's very individual. Don't expect much world building in a way. That being said, I kind of get why it's a source of inspiration for so many writers, my ex included, and I respect that. I'm happy I read this. Like, I'm glad I went through this at least once in my life, so it's definitely not a waste of time, but I doubt that I'll ever reread it, honestly, though I'll probably keep it in my library. And that concludes my reading wrap-up for the month of March. In the month of April, I will be reading The Magician King by Lev Grossman, and I say it on this enthusiastic note because I've already started it and I'm really enjoying it. I will also be rereading The Gate to Women's Country, written by Sherry S. Tepper, which I first read in 2017 or 2018. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It is a classic of second wave feminist science fiction, and I definitely do want to do a review for it. For that, I need to reread it first. But on that final note, I hope you'll have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in a few other videos. But until then, bye-bye.